What's your story of realizing your friend was a sociopath? Story 1. He couldn't comprehend the difference between harmless pranks and cruelty, and it became clear in high school. It went so far that he broke into a friend's home, stole her TV, and then got angry when her family called the police over a prank. Trying to talk to him about the difference between pranks and crime was met with a blank stare, almost confusion, followed by vicious mocking. I didn't see him much after that, and I completely cut ties with him after he started casually talking about harming women. Story 2. We were in high school. I finally called her out for manipulating and bullying people into being her friend, including me, after she told the whole school I was pregnant. I wasn't, and as this was a small, very religious school, it took a lot of effort to put those rumors to rest. In retaliation, she accused my mother of slapping her when she came to our house to apologize. For many reasons, this was absolutely false. My parents and I decided I would transfer schools the next semester to remove us from her. On my first day at the new school, she came running up to me, grinning, going on an excited tangent about how she told her mother she wanted to switch schools too, so she could be with me. It took another 2 years, and intervention from the school, after my mother and I built up a good amount of evidence, for her to finally be told that if she didn't leave me alone, there would be consequences. We were ready to report her for stalking and harassment. That threat was finally enough to get her mother to agree to back off. Before that, she kept insisting we were best friends, and her daughter had never done anything wrong. Story 3. He was very open about it. That guy was genuinely helpful. What he seemed to fear most was becoming a helpless person who couldn't fit into society, like those who end up in and out of jail. So, he made it a habit or a challenge to help at least one person every day with no strings attached, whether it was a friend or a stranger. It was a way to hold himself accountable. It was, well, a bit odd, and he was kind of odd too, but he was upfront about it so that he'd have a harder time doing harm if he ever lost his self-control. It was definitely partly an ego thing, I think. He liked being seen as the nice, friendly person who overcame his flaws. I hope he really did. His motivation was unusual, but I've never met anyone as helpful as him. He wasn't afraid of anything. He'd do risky things like remove wasp nests from a neighbor's porch, just as casually as he'd help an elderly person carry groceries to their car. Cool guy with some wild stories. Story 4. There were a lot of red flags. He was definitely closeted bi, which is fine, but his behavior wasn't. The main red flag was the string of ruined relationships he left behind. He was a college theater professor and had a pattern of targeting emotionally vulnerable young men in the department, often those who had recently gone through breakups or had no male role model. Many had issues with their fathers or had lost them. He would spend time with them, showering them with attention until they believed they were his closest friend. He thrived on adoration. I don't even think it was all about physical relationships, though that may have been part of it. He simply enjoyed being idolized. When they started showing interest in other people, he would start pulling away hard. He had a pattern of subtly tearing them down, then building them back up so they were conditioned to seek his approval. If he got bored, he discarded them. He once told me that he viewed everyone through a caricature he created. For example, a black friend of ours was the loud black woman. Another friend who had recently lost his father and was struggling with depression, he called Eeyore. He couldn't self-reflect. If he knew he upset someone, he'd apologize. But it always felt empty. He didn't truly acknowledge wrongdoing or take accountability. He was starting to become an alcoholic, attending lectures and rehearsals under the influence, and later laughing about it like it was some kind of inside joke. He lied constantly. The man was pushing 40 but tried to convince college-age guys he was in his late 20s just so they'd hang out with him. He didn't respect boundaries. At his house, he'd regularly expose himself as a joke and acted surprised when I didn't laugh. As one of the guys he emotionally manipulated, I eventually realized the relationship wasn't healthy and that his emotional involvement with 19 or 20-year-old students was unacceptable. I cut ties and he shifted from love bombing to resentment instantly. Later, my wife and I were visiting friends who also knew him. They had let him stay in their guest room for months during COVID after he lost his housing, but they eventually kicked him out and cut ties too. They later told us they'd run into one of his former high school classmates who said, "I'm so glad you got away from him. There is something wrong with him. He's dangerous." Story 5. We were friends with him and his sister. Later, we realized that the only emotion we ever saw in him was anger. Nothing else. That was the first red flag. One of our friends started dating his sister, and one day he came to us and told us that our friend had taken him aside and said that if his sister was hurt, he'd have no problem hurting him in return. Our friend was terrified because he truly believed him. That was our second red flag. The final one came when his family was hit at an intersection. His dad and sister were killed, his mom was hospitalized for observation, and he had some broken bones. When some friends visited him at the hospital, he didn't seem to care at all. The hospital was a teaching facility with psychiatrists on staff, and one came to see if he wanted help. He basically asked, "Why would I need help?" His mom agreed to a formal evaluation, and he was confirmed to be psychopathic. His mom basically committed the rest of her life to making sure he could function in society. She taught him what was considered socially right and wrong, and helped him understand the laws and behaviors expected of him. Story 6. I wouldn't say he was a friend, but we were in the same rehab program, so we knew each other. The only emotion I ever saw him express was anger, and when he got angry, we knew to stay away. He ignored the rules and boundaries set by the counselors and group leaders. He didn't care if he said something offensive or hurtful. The biggest red flag, though, was when he said he liked to kill animals. We were discussing coping skills or something like that, and he said that when he gets mad, he likes killing animals. At first, we kind of laughed it off, but then we realized he was serious. He talked about all the animals he'd harmed and said rabbits were his favorite. He liked watching them struggle. I guess it gave him a sense of power and control. It's sad because I know he experienced some incredibly traumatic things as a kid, but I still felt uneasy around him. Last I heard, his parents sent him to a psychiatric residential facility. He was under 18, but I'm not sure what happened after that. Story 7. I had a friend who always seemed a little off, low empathy, but I ignored a lot of the signs. She was a destructive party girl and had a weirdly hostile relationship with her mom. I noticed she could be a bit of a bully and often looked down on others. I was a vulnerable teen who had trouble making friends, so I tried to overlook it since she was nice to me. Then there was a moment where she got super drunk, slept with my boyfriend, and they both called me together to mock me about it. It was humiliating. Peak embarrassment. What's even more wild is that a week later, she approached me like nothing had happened and acted like it was all just a bit of fun. I already knew she wasn't a good person, but I realized something was deeply wrong with her when she had no awareness that what she did would make me not want to be her friend. She genuinely seemed surprised that I was distancing myself. From what mutual friends have told me, she still behaves the same way. She treats people like disposable amusement. She's not clever enough to mask or manipulate. Everything she does is blunt, and she doesn't seem to realize how hurtful it is. Losing friends doesn't seem to bother her either. She's never angry or defensive. She just doesn't understand why people are so sensitive. Story 8. When I was 21, in 1989, I walked into the hallway of our shared house and saw him playing the electric piano. He had a photo of a girl he'd been dating in front of him and was, badly, playing mournful-sounding music. Bad breakup? I asked, and he explained in detail how she had accused him of being emotionless because he wasn't moved by some minor tragedy. I forget exactly what it was. He told me she was right. He didn't care and couldn't make himself care. He didn't take joy in others' suffering. He just wasn't affected by it. So the piano and photo were his attempt to fit in with the rest of you. See, if I'm doing this, I'm acting like someone with feelings, and people will like me better. I gave the 1989 version of weird flex but okay, and he seemed to take that as approval. After that, he'd come to me every week or so and ask how someone with feelings might react to a situation in his life. Eventually, he got pretty good at it. He called it putting on the human mask. People he met later generally accepted him as a normal, functioning person. We've remained friends ever since. He's very successful as a financial manager because emotion never factors into his decisions. He's married with a couple of kids whom he describes as mostly gibbering animals, but sometimes they think. His wife seems happy, but he rescued her from a really toxic situation, so maybe she feels she's better off. As far as I know, she has no idea his humanity is an act. He still calls me every year around her birthday, their anniversary, or Christmas, and asks for help choosing gifts. He's smart enough to know cliché gifts won't work, but he lacks the perspective to put himself in her shoes and choose something meaningful. Judging by her reactions, I'm pretty good at picking gifts for her. For those wondering, he's not autistic, or at least not meaningfully so. He's what we used to call a psychopath before all the DSM changes. He has flat affect and no remorse. He was raised in a stable and loving home and followed his parents' rules even though he never understood why, other than to avoid consequences. He loves business because you can be as predatory as you want without consequences as long as it's legal. His main goal is status and wealth, and he has both. Having a seemingly loving family boosts that status. Treating them badly would ruin that image. He once said that if he were born in caveman times, he'd be the guy staying up at night to guard the camp while everyone else slept. Story 9. He yelled at me because my nephew didn't want to watch a movie with his kids. My nephew is 2 years old and scared of the dark. The kids were using a projector instead of a regular TV, so the room had to be dark. Every time the door would close, my nephew would freak out, so I decided to keep him with me. My friends started flipping out, screaming at me, and threatening to punish one of his kids, who did nothing wrong. He also started yelling at his wife. He has 5 kids, mostly girls. The oldest girl tried to give my nephew snacks to help him feel comfortable and offered to sit next to him, but he was too afraid. It felt like she was trying to help because her siblings' safety depended on it. I didn't know what to do other than leave with my nephew so the girls wouldn't get in trouble. I tried calling social services, but there's no proof that the girls are being harmed or neglected, so they're still with him. I'm afraid for the girls and his wife. I think he's suffering a mental collapse after losing his mother to cancer. She had abused him. Now he's become very harsh with the women in his life, including me. My husband doesn't want me going back there without him. I've been trying to convince their mother to take the kids and leave, but she won't listen. I can only reach her through Facebook. She uses her daughter's school tablet to message me. She's only able to contact me when he leaves the house. He takes all the phones with him. She's not allowed to leave the house, have friends, or host visitors while he's away. He doesn't let her buy clothes or take care of herself. She always calls me crying and complaining about how he treats her, but she won't do anything. I defend them when I'm there, but I try not to because he treats them worse after I leave. I feel helpless. I don't know what to do. If I were wealthy, I'd buy her a house and move them far away where he could no longer scare them. I feel so helpless. Story 10. I used to work for someone who I now believe was a sociopath. At first, he was incredibly nice. I honestly thought he was the best boss I ever had. He overpaid me, gave me lots of time off, and occasionally gave me gifts. Along the way, there were moments where his behavior was clearly questionable. At work, he had a habit of sending me into unsafe situations without recognizing the risk to my well-being. When an employee left for another job, he acted like they were a pet goldfish, easily replaced. I remember one occasion where I simply mentioned that a former coworker and I had visited a local distillery after work. My boss went on a rant about how that employee was unreliable, saying he always knew the person wasn't a long-term fit. Keep in mind, he was the one who hired him. There were 2 final straws. The first was when he took me to lunch and threw a temper tantrum at me in public. The second happened during a one-on-one meeting where he brought a knife and used it to intimidate me into doing what he wanted. Story 11. I used to worry, and sometimes still do, that I might be a sociopath. I've always had this unsettling sense that other people aren't real, that they exist more as reflections of me. I know this isn't true, but at the same time, I don't fully feel it's true, if that makes sense. As a teenager, new experiences felt like my life's purpose. There were lots of normal things to try, but also many taboo, illegal, harmful, or disturbing ideas that fascinated me because they were forbidden. Things like violence, power, and manipulation intrigued me. I knew these were wrong, but I was curious. And since I wasn't convinced others were truly real, I didn't feel a strong reason to care. I'm also agnostic. I recognize I'll never know for certain about God or about the existence of other people as independent beings. And because I can't know, I realized it was too big a gamble to hurt others just for the sake of curiosity. I decided to be good. That's my choice now. As a teen, there were close calls and definite red flags. I killed my pet tarantula by dropping it out the window in a box when I got tired of it, then lied about it. I once had an urge to harm a family member during a vulnerable moment, just to see what it was like, but I fought it off. I accidentally broke my brother's neck while trying to force him to apologize to me in a specific way. I found the keys to my dad's gun safe and secretly kept them for years, just in case I ever needed them. I even vaguely planned to bring a weapon to school if things went too far. And that doesn't even cover the drugs, theft, and casual rule-breaking that were part of my daily life. I didn't think I was bad. I just thought I was extremely curious and needed answers. Now I'm nearly 30, And I've spent the last decade focused on goodness, kindness, empathy, and responsibility. I've changed my values and my path. I believe most people in my life today would describe me as a kind, ethical person. I'm a nurse, I'm vegan, I raise chickens to donate eggs, I volunteer, and I'm active in my community. I avoid power dynamics and hold myself to high standards. I'd give someone the shirt off my back and walk home in the cold with a smile. I think I come across as a good person, and honestly, I believe I am one, because I've worked to be. But I came from a very dark and disturbing place. Story 12. My uncle is a sociopath. That side of the family is dysfunctional, so no one noticed for a long time that he wasn't normal. It took my father and me, as outsiders, to finally realize he was completely incapable of genuine emotion. He just faked it, and he faked it well. I could go on and on with stories. The final straw for us was when my father went to work for him. It took about a year before he realized my uncle's entire business was a scam, possibly outright fraud. This was before the internet, so word of mouth spread very slowly, and a lot of money was stolen in the meantime. Think of a massive Ponzi scheme. He would eventually deliver on his promises, but only after getting 2 or 3 more people to buy in. Eventually, regulators stepped in. He lost wife too. It turned out all her money and her parents' money was tied up in his business. All of it was gone. We cut ties with him too. Nothing was ever his fault. If you challenged him, he turned on you immediately. He's now on wife 3. From what we see through Facebook and from relatives still in touch, he's constantly chasing new get-rich-quick schemes. His online presence is full of lies. Wife number 3 is also successful, and he just lives off her. The frustrating part is that if you, dear Reddit user, were to meet him in person, you'd probably like him, believe everything he says, and wonder why we're so mean to him. Yes, that has actually happened before. Story 13. I have an ex who had something seriously wrong with him. I know people often say that about their exes, but this was very different. He wasn't malicious, but he had zero regard for other people, none at all. He was extremely charming and very skilled at lying, highly intelligent. I didn't realize the extent of it until after we broke up. I was shocked when I found out he drugged his grandmother just to steal her car. He never did things just to hurt people. He didn't seem to get satisfaction from causing pain. He wasn't like a violent criminal or anything. But if someone stood between him and what he wanted, he had no issue doing whatever it took to get past them. He only surrounded himself with people who were useful to him. If they weren't useful, he had absolutely no interest in them. Story 14. When I was in kindergarten, my mom worked at my school providing support for kids with behavioral issues. My best friend at the time was this sweet, charming boy who was always really nice to me. He was a bit quiet whenever other kids joined us, but I never thought anything was wrong with him. My mom, however, knew things I didn't. He had problems with bedwetting, had been caught harming animals, and was in therapy because he talked about setting his house on fire while his family slept. She was so afraid he might become fixated on me that she transferred me to a different school instead of trying to end our friendship directly. She has worked with many kids in difficult situations, but she says that he was the only one who ever genuinely frightened her because of his complete lack of humanity. He was very convincing on the outside, but deep down, he didn't seem to care about anything at all. Story 15. My little sister, 27 years old, was recently diagnosed as a sociopath. Growing up, we always suspected she couldn't understand empathy. For example, as a young child, she would get irritated by the sound of someone breathing and try to stop them from breathing just so she could enjoy silence. The only thing that ever mattered to her was her own comfort and validation. She didn't seem to grasp that other people wanted those things too. She was mostly quiet as a child, just observing and absorbing how people behaved so she could mimic them. That made her incredibly good at manipulating anyone she met. She lived with my parents for years, until she tried to burn the house down as punishment for them upsetting her. The reason? They asked her to register the car they bought for her. To her, a personal offense like that was enough to justify something that extreme. She's currently living with an agile man she's convinced to act as her caretaker because, in her words, sick is an annoying distraction she doesn't want to deal with. I love her deeply, but it's incredibly hard to deal with her and all the different versions of her that other people know. She's a chameleon, and that helps her get what she wants. But I often wonder how lonely it must be to go through life without anyone truly knowing who you are. Story 16. I'm pretty sure the last guy I dated may have been a sociopath. He didn't care about anything except himself. His mom died of cancer, and he just didn't care. He never mentioned whether they had a strained relationship, and the couple of times I met her, she seemed very nice. His response to her death was, "Oh cool, now she won't be around to nag me all the time." And that was it. He never showed any sign of grief over her loss. When my grandfather passed away, his response to me was, "So what? It's just your grandpa." I got no emotional support from him at all. He never took no for an answer. If I didn't want to be intimate, he'd manipulate me until I gave in. He asked for it almost immediately after I told him my grandfather had passed. He knew how to act charming around strangers to get what he wanted. Then he'd later brag to me about how he manipulated them and how easy it was. Everyone I knew thought he was the sweetest guy, but I saw through the tactics and was the one who suffered from his behavior. He was vegan, and part of me thinks he did it to come across as compassionate. He'd always say people needed to go vegan for the animals. This is the same person who laughed at videos of animals being hurt. Not graphic ones, but still. Later on, he got a tattoo to honor the anniversary of his mom's death. But he also told me he planned to get matching tattoos for his dad and brothers, filling them in after they passed too. That just felt off, like he was anticipating their deaths in advance. After we broke up, my friend came forward and told me about the abuse she endured from him over several years. She was the one who introduced us, but he forced her to. I had no idea, but in hindsight, it should have been obvious. It's been years, but apparently he's still obsessed with me and thinks we'll end up together again someday. Thankfully, he's broke and lives several states away, so I don't worry much about him finding me. Story 17. There wasn't a specific incident. I didn't see him for what he was until he ended our friendship, because I didn't want kids and was taking an extra semester off university to recover from some trauma. Once he was out of my life, it was like a fog lifted. Throughout our friendship, I loved him as dearly as a brother. Looking back, I can't understand why I didn't see something was wrong. When he did or said things that should have felt warm and comforting, they just felt off, cold. Anytime there was conflict and I started to question things, he'd reel me back in and I'd go back to seeing him as this perfect brother figure. He would mock my mental health struggles, like my suicidal ideation or self-harm, and when I asked him to stop, he'd say just the right thing to make me feel like the villain. He never apologized, but somehow made me feel like he was the one being wronged. Then he'd do it again. Now that I'm no longer under his influence, I can see how strange that whole friendship was. We went from strangers to brother and sister in a matter of months. Looking back, I remember how charismatic he was, but there was something off. My instincts were screaming at me, but I ignored them. I feel foolish now. It broke my heart when he ended our friendship. He wasn't violent or threatening, but even now when I hear his name or smell a cologne that reminds me of him, I feel panic. Like I've seen a monster. I haven't spoken to him in about 3 years, but the fear still hits me out of nowhere. Most of the time, I don't think about him unless something triggers the memory. It wasn't some dramatic breakup, not compared to what others go through, and yet I still hurt from how he walked away. I still feel worthless, and at the same time, I still feel scared. How is it possible to feel sad and terrified of someone all at once? Story 18. I knew something was off about him from the day we met. We were around 12 or 13, but it took about a year to really understand what it was. It was mostly in the way he started conversations. Always bizarre, random topics, usually centered around how he'd been wronged in the past, even if it had nothing to do with what we were talking about. Like we'd be discussing a movie and ask if he'd seen it, and he'd pretend to be lost in thought. Then say something like, "What? Sorry, I was just thinking about when my stepdad was killed by that drunk driver." This kind of thing went on for years. When he turned 18, he came into some money and spent it all on terrible tattoos and dangerous drugs. He started showing up at our homes unannounced and would do weird things, jumping on the couch or yelling at the TV. He got kicked out of multiple places. Then he started breaking into homes and businesses. Amazingly, he never did any time, as far as I know. A few years ago, my mom ran into him in a grocery store parking lot. They hadn't seen each other in over 10 years. He asked if she remembered him, and she said, "Yeah, how are you?" And he replied, "Well, I'm HIV positive, but otherwise okay." That's just the kind of guy he was. I looked him up on Facebook later and saw he had a GoFundMe set up for his treatment costs. A week later, his own mother commented, "My son does not have HIV. He's lying for attention and money." Again, the GoFundMe was immediately taken down and his Facebook account disappeared shortly after. He was a sociopath through and through. Story 19. I knew someone that I could classify as a sociopath. She would deny it endlessly, but it started with little things here and there. until she ended up threatening to extort me, and I had to get a restraining order. She was dating my ex's brother at the time and was very friendly with me at first. But then issues started to come up. For example, she would repeat things I confided in her to my ex's parents, dragging everyone into it. I ended up having to sit down and apologize for everything in front of the whole family. It was incredibly embarrassing. She would also make passive-aggressive comments about my appearance like, "I like natural makeup more," not trying to look like a clown, and "You can come to the event, but please don't wear those leggings." Eventually, she escalated to catfishing me. She created a fake Facebook profile pretending to be someone I went to school with. She used everything from those conversations against me. She also hacked into my Facebook and pulled private messages to use as leverage. She threatened to expose everything to the family. I brought all the evidence and threats to court, and I was awarded a restraining order. But that wasn't enough. She went around telling my old friends that I was accusing them of horrible things, like being child abusers. I lost many friendships and a lot of peace of mind because of her. Story 20. I became convinced my mother had some form of personality disorder, possibly psychopathic or sociopathic, shortly after my 17th birthday. At the time, I was living with my aunt and uncle because my mother had kicked me out at age 15. On my birthday, we had a celebration by the lake. Coming out of the water, I stubbed my foot on a rock at just the right angle to jam my toenail backwards into the bone of my left toe, fracturing it. It was some of the worst pain I've ever experienced. After the toenail was removed and I was treated for a staph infection from the lake water, my mother showed up at the hospital with a fake maternal act that I unfortunately fell for. She eventually said, "Well, this is just a sign that your little runaway act should end and you should come home." Never mind that she had kicked me out. I was happy living with my aunt and uncle. I told her I wasn't coming back and that I'd found a good home. I explained that I didn't want to return because all we ever did was fight. She got abruptly angry, yanked the pillows out from under my injured foot, and screamed that I was an ungrateful child. She made a whole scene in the hospital. I was in such pain afterward that I blacked out. Years later, when I brought up the incident, she said, "I don't regret that. You needed a hard lesson, and I'm glad it hurt." Since then, I've noticed how quickly she can shift from loving to cruel when she doesn't get what she wants. As long as you follow her rules, she acts like the ideal mother. But if you don't, you're the worst person in the world in her eyes. We don't have a relationship anymore. Just for the record. Story 21. My stepson. At first we joked about the idea, but eventually we began to seriously wonder if something was wrong. At first it seemed like normal misbehavior, but it was constant and exhausting. The second his dad and I were drained, he would escalate. As soon as we were tired or distracted, he'd steal something, break something, or endanger my daughter, who was younger than him. We had to be cautious about what we told him. If I said doing X will hurt the cat, he would absolutely do X the first chance he got. He was young but very patient and never forgot things. He had been assaulted by his older brother while at his mom's house, but it didn't seem to affect him. We thought maybe he didn't fully understand what had happened. We were concerned about how he'd process it later. We got him into therapy right away and made sure the brothers were completely separated. He did very well in therapy at first. The therapist was confident he wouldn't repeat the behavior and showed no signs of becoming an abuser. But he started asking very detailed questions about about what bad people do and how they get away with it. He used that knowledge, information from his therapist, to manipulate and abuse my daughter. He wasn't remorseful. He admitted he wanted to scare and hurt her. He said, "I wanted to see what she'd do." What he did to her wasn't just copying what happened to him. It was calculated, psychological, and deliberate. He used therapy as a tool to figure out how to hurt someone more effectively. He was only 8. She was 7. Story 22. I knew a sociopath. He terrified me when we were teens. He would become obsessively fixated on minor slights and would meticulously plan revenge, so long as it entertained him. The smallest things would set him off, often based on misunderstandings. For example, someone bumping into him might be seen as a public insult, and he'd go out of his way to ruin their life. He stole constantly, things he wanted and things he didn't want, just to upset people. He loved seeing people grieve over items they lost, things like old watches from grandparents. He'd steal them just for the emotional damage. He lied constantly. Some lies were to avoid consequences, others were to create chaos, and some seemed completely pointless, maybe just to keep people unsteady. Pets were harmed, his own pets, roommates' pets, neighbors' pets. He never killed them, but he definitely injured them. He put a stick through a cat's eye, through a dog's stomach. He poisoned a dog. One cat disappeared. We don't know if it was him, but it wouldn't be surprising. The creepiest part? He was always calm, never angry, never upset. He did all these terrible things with a smile. He seemed to enjoy it. Now, as an adult, he comes across as the nicest guy. He's socially skilled, makes people feel important, and is the first to offer help. If you saw him today, you'd never guess. I once told him I misjudged him back in the day. I had been convinced he'd grow up to be a dangerous person. He said I wasn't wrong. He told me he has ASPD and that after multiple arrests and restraining orders, he realized he needed to figure out how to get along. He said he couldn't handle being caged like an animal. He told me he feels nothing for anyone. I've known you my whole life, and you've always been good to me, but no offense, if you dropped dead right now, I wouldn't care. He said it with a friendly smile, but his eyes were empty. I asked about his parents. He said he doesn't hold grudges, he just enjoys tormenting people. And if either of his parents died, he wouldn't feel a thing. I changed the topic and walked away, uneasy again, because now I know his kindness is just a strategy to stay out of prison. Story 23. He used to joke about things you really shouldn't joke about. But he wasn't really joking. He would talk about doing things with children and about wanting to harm animals and people. He did hurt some animals, but I don't know the full extent of what else he may have done. Things definitely changed during his senior year of high school, and not for the better. Once during a Halo LAN party, he said, "Watch this, I'm gonna stab him." Then he actually sliced a friend across the arms with a pair of scissors. He got excited when he saw the blood. He even had to touch it. We had to use a whole roll of paper towels to clean the friend up, and he ended up needing stitches. Another time we were at his house and he grabbed a handgun from his mom's room, ran upstairs, pointed it at another friend's head, and pulled the trigger 3 times. "Ha ha ha, I guess it's not loaded," he said. The facial expressions, the wild eyes, I'll never forget them. I stopped associating with him during high school, his senior year and my junior year. I'm not sure what he's like now, but I know he still lives nearby and works at a local shop that sells books, music, and video games. Story 24. They barely reacted to emotional situations. Everything they said or did was based on cold, brutal logic. In high school, they made an adult cry just because he was annoyed with them. They were charming without trying, extremely intelligent, and even taught their friend group how to pickpocket. They once stole a Nintendo Switch and several phones. They weren't evil, just very different. They admitted to being a sociopath. Oddly enough, they could be very kind. They gave birthday gifts, though one of them was a huge knife given to a girl, which was questionable. They tried giving emotional advice, but it came out as more of a command than support. Sometimes they came off as sweet, but it was hard to tell if it was intentional. They once bought a friend with vision issues a pair of custom-made spectacles that cost $200 and gave them as a gift. When we asked them which gender they preferred, they said, women. They are generally smarter, more considerate, more mature, and yet somehow less acknowledged. When asked what type of women they liked, they said, huggable and sweet. One thing they said that stuck with me was, not everyone will understand me, but I will always understand them, and I accept their reasoning for it. Not everyone can handle me because of how I decide to do things my way. Everyone is unique, but few are truly different. Most follow the rules and ideals of others, which is kind of sad. They limit their freedom by limiting their perspective and resist major changes or differences. It was strange seeing someone so far outside the norm, yet choosing to walk among everyone else. Story 25. I love both my parents, but I think they fall somewhere on this spectrum. Neither of them has ever shown any remorse or guilt, at least not that I can remember. My dad was more obvious. He was physically and psychologically abusive. He could also be affectionate, funny, and charming, but he didn't seem to have any regard for other people's well-being. He believed he was smarter than everyone else and could see things that others couldn't. Very arrogant. He seemed to experience stress and anxiety, but never fear. He could be generous, but was incredibly manipulative. Truly terrifying at times. My mom was subtler, but also violent during our childhood and neglectful. She doesn't seem to feel fear either. She often endangers other people's well-being. I won't go into detail. I still worry she might come across this. I've confronted her before, trying to get her to stop. She's very charming and can be generous, but she also seems to get bored and starts experimenting with how far she can push people emotionally. She's excellent at identifying others' insecurities and bringing them up in casually cruel ways. I've watched her be friendly to someone in the service industry, then suddenly turn cold without warning. It leaves people flailing, confused about what went wrong. It's subtle but painful to watch. I try to be extra kind to counteract it when I'm around. We don't have much contact now, but I still care about her, and part of me feels responsible for the way she treats others. I also had a friends with benefits situation that I ended after recognizing some warning signs. I didn't feel entirely safe with them. They would forget boundaries I had set, made disrespectful comments about children, and often spoke about others in a condescending tone. They were superficially charming and often generous, always complimenting others, but would also exploit people around them. They seemed annoyed by others' emotions, especially when someone expressed worry or distress. Story 26. There was this guy I knew in college. He was ridiculously charming, looked like a male model, and had successfully made friends with just about everyone on campus, including me. He was always involved in clubs and activities and seemed to be everywhere. He came across as the coolest guy around. One time I went out to eat with him and a few others after he told me he had a business proposition. He wanted to start a company, I was studying filmmaking, where I would charge student actors to be in my college movies, promising them footage for their reels. I tried to explain that I'm the one who was supposed to pay the actors, not the other way around. He kept pushing until I gave him a firm no. You'd have thought I insulted him to his core. I've heard about the slip mask moment when someone can't maintain their facade anymore. This was one of those moments. I genuinely thought he might stab me in the eye with an IHOP fork. The tension at the table was unbearable until we left. After that, I never really spoke to him again. I think being cool and admired was important to him. Maybe my refusal to validate his genius idea shattered that for a second. I've heard that since then, he's acknowledged that something might be off. Story 27. I don't know what this classifies as, but I had a friend with serious rage issues. He would completely snap over nothing. We were a group of friends riding the tram, being loud and admittedly obnoxious. One friend jokingly said to the rage guy, "Hey, that guy talked bad about your mom," pointing at a random man. It was clearly a joke. Why would a stranger even say something like that? But the rage guy lost it. The random man got off at the next stop, and our friend followed him. What happened next was the most brutal thing I've ever seen. He walked up behind the man and punched him out of nowhere. The man collapsed, and our friend kicked him in the head at least 4 times and then in the body. The first punch clearly knocked the guy out, so the kicks were just excessive. As the man lay there bleeding and unconscious, he spat on him and mumbled something about not talking disrespectfully. Then he laughed, looked at us, still frozen in shock, and said, "Whoopsie," while shrugging like it was nothing. A woman nearby looked horrified and reached for her phone. He laughed again and said, "Yeah, call the cops and an ambulance. This guy needs it." As she dialed, he started running down the street, still laughing. It was surreal, like he didn't even register that he'd severely injured someone for no reason. Later, I read that the man had sustained brain damage. Another friend told the rage guy about it, and apparently he just shrugged it off. I didn't want to hang out with him after that, but I kept hearing similar stories, like how he once threw a chair through a pizzeria window over something trivial, or how he used to flick cigarette butts toward gas station pumps because he thought it would be cool if it blew up. Story 28. The mask slipped. He wasn't a friend, but I worked very closely with him. And that was worse because I couldn't choose how much time I had to spend around him. I had a gut feeling. He was popular, extroverted, cheerful, and loud. But I never trusted him. He was a high-powered attorney and lobbyist. One of those competitive triathletes, handsome, wealthy, an overachiever. But he wore a mask, and sometimes it would slip. I could tell he faked his emotions. When no one was looking, he was cold and vile. One day, I overheard him say some disgusting, malicious things about children, framed as jokes. That confirmed everything for me. I started avoiding him after that. I don't know when he realized I saw him for what he was. I was working as a receptionist, and on my last day before starting a new job, he stopped by my desk. He smiled this horrible fake smile, held eye contact for nearly a full minute. Then he knocked twice on the desk, like something straight out of House of Cards. It felt like a warning. He asked where I was going next, and I lied. I didn't want someone like him to know anything about my life. He was powerful. He had regular meetings on Capitol Hill. I've also had a boss I suspect was a sociopath, and I believe my mother was one as well. My mom couldn't hide it, though. She's now mostly isolated and socially rejected. As for that lawyer, there are a lot of successful sociopaths out there. Many of them are drawn to positions of power. He was married with kids too. I hope they're okay. That man was not right. Story 29. Started as friends, became a relationship, and ended in survival. He once told me he had a mental snap, pointed a shotgun at his ex-girlfriend, and that his mom stood between them, placing the barrel at her own stomach. He said he pulled the trigger, but the bullet turned inside the barrel and the gun never went off. He retold this story casually, many times. He never expressed remorse for the trauma he caused. He said he was institutionalized and diagnosed with temporary psychotic disorder. He was put on medication but claimed it made him feel like a zombie, so he stopped taking it. He told me every ex he had cheated on him or mistreated him. One, he claimed, beat him during an argument. She jumped on his back and hit him with rings on her fingers. That part I believed because he had visible scars, but he initially said it was over something stupid, then changed the story and said it happened after he caught her with his best friend. What tipped me off were the subtle shifts in his stories, ones he told me and ones he told new people we met. Almost every ex came with a horror story he broadcasted to everyone. I was young. I thought maybe he just had a rough past. I sympathized. But every year we were together, things got worse. He would love bomb me in the beginning, but eventually the cruelty came out, making harsh jokes about me, limiting my food intake with things like, "Save that for the kids," and even threatening to take our children if I didn't comply with certain things. I'm being vague, but what he did was illegal and not subject to any statute of limitations. By year 6, almost 7, he began physically hurting me. One time he hit me hard in the jaw. A few hours later, he made burgers for dinner like nothing had happened. I cried because I couldn't open my mouth wide enough to eat, and he said, "It's not that bad. Do you want another smack?" I left him 2 days later. A week after leaving, he coerced our oldest child into saying something that resulted in them being removed by the state. I can't prove it because I was staying several states away, but I know he was behind it. The outcome was devastating. He found ways to contact me no matter how many times I blocked him. Social media, email, new phone numbers. It continued until 2 years ago when he finally went to prison. So here's my advice. If someone starts telling you shocking, disturbing stories, believe them and run. These confessions are a test to see what you'll tolerate. If you show sympathy, they see it as permission to escalate. I wish I hadn't been so young and trusting. I had no help from friends or family. It took a stranger online to get me out. Please don't let it get to where I was. Go no contact, no matter how much it hurts. Whether they're a friend, family member, or partner, love is not abuse, and it should never be tolerated, no matter the relationship. Story 30. In a group chat, we were posting memes and laughing, just having fun. Then one guy posted a documentary about Holocaust survivors. At first I thought maybe he misunderstood the context of the group, but it turns out he kept it saved on his phone. Not out of interest or compassion, but because he thought it was funny. His phone barely had any storage, yet he kept this video, which was at least 20 minutes long, maybe even an hour, just so he could laugh at it during his free time. It was disturbing and horrific. No one in the group replied. We all just went silent. It took him 24 hours to apologize, and by then, the damage was done. I had already been trying to distance myself from him before that. This guy dropped out of college to try to climb ranks in an online video game. He spent a whole year trying and never succeeded. He failed his placement matches multiple times. He even got permanently banned from Starbucks, his job at the time, for repeated lateness, possible discriminatory remarks, and inappropriate jokes. He was one of those cashiers who forced awkward small talk on customers because he was clearly lonely. By the end of the year, he couldn't even earn in-game rewards because he kept using offensive slurs toward both his team and the enemy team. Racist, homophobic language, and constantly bringing religion into his insults. It was exhausting. Honestly, I never want to see him in person again. Even if he returns to our college during our senior year, he'll still be behind. People like him are what ruin gaming communities. My mental health has gotten so much better since I stopped interacting with him, muted him in the group chat, ignored his DMs, and removed him from my friend list. Story 31. I'm not sure what to classify him as exactly, but I knew a man who seemed to have no real relationship with the truth. Compulsive liar, manipulator. Sociopath? You be the judge. It started with love bombing. He messaged me on Facebook, spent an entire night talking to me, gave me a massage, insisted I sleep in his bed while he took the couch. He stayed up all night telling stories about his life, how he had a chronic illness, how he was once training to become a priest. Both lies. He listened to me in a way I'd never been listened to before. Then he turned cold. Suddenly, I was just someone he invited over a couple of times for what turned out to be casual encounters. I went expecting even a fraction of the care and attention he had shown before, but got none of it. I later found out he had only invited me because another guy in our friend group had confessed a crush on me. He seemed to enjoy scooping women away from others. Then a young woman in our mutual circle told me she liked me. Eventually, she invited me to a threesome with him. Cool, I thought. It seemed like fun. Then she said she was glad she could finally share their relationship with someone, as they'd had to keep it a secret for the past year due to his immigration status. A lie. She also said he was the first man she had ever been with. At this point, I knew he had cheated on her, not only with me, but with at least 6 other women. He was also on BDM dating sites. One of my friends had met him there. I felt sick. I had poison in my brain. What do I do with all this? Clearly, mutual friends knew he was seeing multiple people, but somehow the woman at the center of it all was in the dark. First red flag. Sociopaths often create a version of reality that makes you feel like going along with their lies is easier. You lie to yourself to avoid disrupting the illusion. I waited a few days before doing anything. I was young and confused. I messaged him. He immediately called me. Second red flag. Liars avoid written records. I confronted him, said he cheated on her with me and others, and I was going to tell her. At first, he claimed they had a don't ask, don't tell policy. I didn't believe it. When I pushed back, he said telling her would emotionally destroy her and that all her friends were through him. I promised I wouldn't say anything, just to get off the phone. He lived in a big share house and strategically surrounded himself with 2 types of people: highly charismatic individuals with big social circles to improve his image by association, and very insecure, nerdy guys who idolized him. Some were actually afraid of him, though he wasn't physically intimidating. He also ran what he called a dojo, basically a weekend fight club for nerdy guys. He would often invite the women he was seeing to watch. We later figured out he deliberately placed the woman he was dating in the same room with women he was cheating on her with. Third red flag. He liked putting people in cruel, uncomfortable social situations. Eventually, I told the woman the truth. It broke my heart. She said he was her first and it shattered her. But instead of lashing out, she thanked me. I'll never forget the look on her face. We tried to confront him together. She was scared he'd talk her into staying. He did. He threatened to harm himself if she left. That's when I started thinking he might be a sociopath rather than a psychopath. He seemed like someone whose ego couldn't handle rejection, who weaponized sympathy. She stayed with him for a few more years but eventually got out. He tried to discredit me, told people I was lying, and even threatened blackmail. I had to gather proof to defend myself. Years later, I saw him outside a club. He walked up to me smiling and said, "Hey, what do I have to do for us to be friends again?" I laughed. I laughed so hard. This experience taught me so much. It's why I don't lie anymore. I used to be a people pleaser. I used to smooth things over. But it's never worth sacrificing your sense of reality or letting yourself cover for someone else's harm. How's he doing now? I know of dozens of women and non-binary people, especially AFAB folks whose identities he would undermine, who've come forward with stories of deception and trauma. He was stringing along multiple people during the time I was around, each one thinking they were in a deep, committed relationship. He still lives in a large share house. They advertise it on Facebook as a safe space for LGBTQ plus alternative youth. I heard he tried to start a club night, but had to jump out a window when the police arrived. Unlicensed staff, unpaid fees for alcohol. He literally jumped out the window. If you meet someone who doesn't seem connected to the truth, someone whose version of reality always rotates to serve their desires in the moment, that's a red flag. Story 32. I was once friends with someone I suspect may have been a sociopath. She was incredibly skilled at maintaining a flawless public image. Her reputation was something people envied. But behind closed doors, she would spread rumors about others and constantly judge anyone who had different views, hobbies, interests, or even just a different look. Her laughter and smile never reached her eyes. There was always this dead, yet strangely hostile stare. She made me feel terrible about myself with backhanded compliments and subtly manipulative you language. No one ever suspected anything. To others, she was always helpful and sweet, an innocent bystander in every situation. Meanwhile, I was slowly going crazy from how she treated me. She ended the friendship herself after realizing I no longer served any use to her. That happened during a time when I was starting to heal, both mentally and physically, and was making new, healthy friendships. She always seemed visibly irritated with my emotional reactions and never once stood up for me when I was being bullied by classmates. I'm glad she ended it. It was a dead-end connection I kept trying to salvage. But I genuinely wonder what kind of life someone like her can lead, completely devoid of true feeling and so steeped in pretense. That cold, empty stare, it still gives me chills. Story 33. I dated him for 4 years in my early 20s. I didn't realize what I was dealing with until years later when I learned more about the behavioral criteria. He believed he was untouchable. He said he was protected by destiny. He had no remorse and constantly tried to control or manipulate every person and situation around him. He never showed stress. I can't recall a single moment he did. Not when he lost his job, not when his dog passed, not when his ex-wife was threatening my safety, not even when his mom became seriously ill or when he couldn't pay off massive debts. Nothing. No emotional response. He had no empathy. He made his elderly father continue working just to pay off his credit card debt, refusing to consolidate or close them. He said, "It's my inheritance, whether I get it now or later," completely ignoring the fact that his dad was being robbed of any comfort in his later years. He married his first wife, knowing he planned to have affairs, simply because he didn't enjoy being with her. He offered me $50,000 to keep our pregnancy when I considered termination, after getting me pregnant without my consent. He lied constantly, from small things like pretending he took the trash out to stealing from me and denying it. I wasn't perfect either, and it was my first serious adult relationship. He was about 10 years older, but it was chaos. The worst part? After everything I endured, I still sometimes think about reaching out to him, especially when I think about the dog we shared, who's now 16. When she passes, part of me will want to tell him, even though he didn't tell me when either of his parents died, people I lived with for 3 years. Trauma brain is hard to fight. Story 34. Let's call her Karen. We were in 3rd grade when she came over to my house for a play date. My grandmother, who was in her 70s, supervised. Karen suggested we play hide and seek. She offered to count first, so I went to hide. I waited and waited until I suddenly heard my grandmother speaking on the phone, distressed and crying. I came out to find her completely shaken. Karen had told her that a man had driven up in a truck and taken me away. My poor grandmother was panicked and terrified. After that, she told me, "There's something wrong with that girl." Years later, right after high school, Karen reached out and we reconnected briefly. I didn't fully remember the hide-and-seek incident for what it was. Just kids being weird, I thought. We hung out for about 2 months, and during that time, she began using fake phone numbers to impersonate me and send harassing texts to all kinds of people. Strangers and people I barely knew began calling my parents' house, threatening legal action over inappropriate messages they claimed I had sent. At the time, I didn't even have a cell phone. Eventually, I started receiving screenshots of the texts, and I recognized her writing style, even her spelling mistakes. The recipients of the messages were all people connected to her, not me. That's when it all clicked. Trust your gut. Don't go back to toxic people out of boredom or nostalgia. People don't change easily, and people like her, they don't change at all. Story 35. My first semester of college, there was a guy, let's call him Paul, who lived on my floor and was part of my close friend group. He was awkward but generally good-natured and likable. One day I noticed he spent a lot of time studying people's facial features before responding. It wasn't obvious, just a slight pause, a quick scan, then a calculated reaction. He hesitated for a moment before saying anything, like he was observing and adjusting. I was curious, so in a casual conversation, I asked if he thought anyone on the floor might be a sociopath. He turned it around, asking what I thought that meant. I explained that I thought a sociopath was someone who lacked empathy due to a neurological condition. That's when he told me he had such a condition. We had a long discussion about how he was diagnosed, his childhood, and how he saw himself through the lens of sociopathy. He said he was afraid to tell people because of how they might react, and that I was the first person he had ever told. When I told him I had suspected it, he laughed and joked, "Maybe you're a sociopath too." I asked how he thought his condition might affect his relationships, and he told me something like, "People are kind to me. Even though I don't really feel anything when I do it, that doesn't mean I shouldn't. People do better when they work together, and wouldn't I want things to be better?" We still loosely keep in touch. I think about that conversation often. Story 36. My mother is like that. We don't speak with her anymore. She was always just off and always cruel. It would take a book to describe it all. But the first moment I realized it was beyond repair was when I was 17. I experienced a serious, life-threatening medical emergency that led to several days of hospitalization, followed by weeks of treatments and therapy to regain basic motor functions. My mom's biggest concern during all of this? That she had to cut her New Orleans vacation short by a day. She initially mocked my symptoms and insisted I was overreacting. It was my dad who eventually forced a trip to the ER. He saved my life. Later, extended family who visited the hospital saw how emotionally distant and cold she was. It made them uncomfortable. That moment unmasked her, and I don't think she ever forgave me for it. Her behavior afterwards was so detached, I sometimes wondered if she would have preferred me to die. Maybe then she could have played the role of the perfect grieving mother and silenced any future complaints about her neglect. Years later, after their divorce, my dad also had a near-death experience from a medical condition, a genetic blood clot issue. She refused to let my brothers visit him in the hospital, saying she had no plans to go downtown that day. While I wept beside her, genuinely terrified, she just stared blankly. It felt like looking into the eyes of a shark, emotionless. Dead, my brothers and I have agreed. When her time comes, she's going into the worst retirement home we can find. Story 37. I used to teach a child 9 years old who terrified both staff and other students, so much so that they were eventually placed in a secure facility. Let's call them H. H was either completely silent or explosively angry. They would study children and staff closely, learn their weaknesses, and use that knowledge to emotionally manipulate or torment them. It followed a pattern. H would select a target, learn everything about them, and use that information to torment them mentally and emotionally for entertainment. One Friday, a child shared with the class that they had just received a parrot for their birthday. By Monday, that child came to school visibly shaken. When I asked what happened, they said H had invited them to the park over the weekend. When they met, H showed up holding a baby bird, fingers around its neck, and then killed it right in front of them. H told them, "Every time you look at your parrot, I want you to think of this."